I've worked the coffee cart outside Windsor Castle for 11 years now. Rain, sun, tourists, pigeons, I've seen it all. But I've never seen anything like what happened that Tuesday in October. It was cold, not freezing, just that gray kind of cold that gets into your fingers. The sky couldn't decide what it wanted to do. Crowds were thin. Mostly a school group in matching yellow jackets, a couple of Americans arguing over a map, and the usual retired folks with expensive cameras they didn't quite know how to use. I remember steam rising off my machine and the smell of wet stone everywhere. Windsor smells like history when it rains, old and heavy. Then I saw the taxi pull up, not a tour bus, a regular black cab. And a young man got out first, maybe 30, and he was moving fast around to the other side. He opened the door like he was handling something breakable. Out came a woman in a wheelchair. She was old, very old. A blanket over her knees, tartan pattern, the kind my own gran used to have. Her hands were folded in her lap, thin, spotted with age. But it was her face that caught me. She was looking up at the castle like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. The young man, I found out later he was her grandson, Thomas, pushed her slowly toward the guard post. There was one soldier on duty there. Bearskin hat, red tunic, still as a statue. You know the ones. They don't move, they don't talk, they don't even seem to breathe. She stopped a few feet from him and just stared, smiling. I couldn't hear what she said at first, but I saw her lips moving, and I saw the grandson lean down, and I saw his shoulders drop, and even from across the courtyard I could tell he was fighting not to cry. That's when the older woman near me, a tour guide named Priya who I've known for years, quietly said, "That's Margaret, I know her." I turned, "You know her?" "Everyone in the village knows her," Priya said. "She used to write letters to the guards for years." I didn't understand what that meant yet, but something in Priya's voice told me this wasn't going to be an ordinary afternoon. The woman, Margaret, kept talking to the soldier, and he did what all of them do. He stood there, perfectly still, eyes forward, not a flicker. But the grandson was crying now, openly, wiping his face with the back of his glove. And a small crowd was starting to gather, the way crowds do when they sense something is happening but don't know what. Priya told me the story while we watched. Margaret was 91. Back in the war, the second one, she'd been a young girl in London during the bombings. Her father had served in the guards, not the ceremonial version people photograph today. The real thing. He died overseas when she was 6. She barely remembered him, just his hands, she used to say, and the sound of his boots on the stairs. For her whole life, the guards meant her father. Every time she saw one of those red tunics, she saw him. So she wrote letters, not to any soldier in particular, just to the regiment. Little notes once or twice a year thanking them. Telling them they mattered. For decades, most probably never got read, but she wrote them anyway. And now she was dying. Cancer, Priya said. The doctors had given her weeks. Margaret had one request, not a fancy holiday, not anything expensive. She wanted to come to Windsor and see a guard one last time, to feel close to her father. That's why the grandson had driven 3 hours that morning. That's why he'd lifted her in and out of the cab so carefully. This was her last wish, and he was going to give it to her no matter what. By now maybe 40 people had gathered. Phones were out, someone whispered, "What's happening?" and someone else shushed them. Margaret was speaking to the guard again. I moved a little closer, pretending to wipe down my cart. I heard her this time. "My father wore that uniform," she said. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "I just wanted to see it once more, that's all. Thank you for standing here, thank you all." And the guard didn't move. Of course he didn't. They're not allowed, that's the whole thing about them. Discipline, stillness. It's a job with rules older than any of us. The grandson gently touched her shoulder. "Come on, Gran, let's not tire you out." She nodded. She got what she came for, I suppose, just to be near it. She reached up and patted her grandson's hand, and he started to turn the wheelchair around. And that's when it happened. The guard moved. I heard it before I saw it. That sharp, sudden sound of a soldier's boot striking stone. The whole crowd flinched. He turned a full, crisp movement and marched 3 steps toward the wheelchair. Everyone went silent, dead silent, even the pigeons seemed to stop. And then, in front of everyone, this soldier, this man who was not supposed to move, not supposed to speak, not supposed to break for anything, snapped to attention directly in front of Margaret. And he saluted her. I have never heard a crowd go quiet like that. He held the salute, rigid, perfect. His eyes were forward, but his whole body was turned toward this tiny old woman in a wheelchair with a tartan blanket, and she just looked up at him, her mouth open a little like a child. Then her hand came up to her chest, and she started to cry. The grandson had both hands over his mouth. Priya, standing next to me, was gripping my arm so hard it hurt, and I hadn't even noticed. The soldier held that salute for a long time. 10 seconds, maybe more. It felt like an hour. And then I still don't fully understand how he was allowed to do this, and honestly I don't care. He lowered his hand, leaned down just slightly, and said something to her. Very quietly. I couldn't hear the words. Nobody could. It was just for her. Whatever he said, Margaret laughed. A wet, breaking, beautiful laugh. And she reached out and took his gloved hand in both of hers and held it against her cheek. The crowd wasn't quiet anymore. People were crying, strangers, the American couple who'd been arguing about the map, the teenagers in the yellow jackets. A big man in a football shirt was wiping his eyes and not caring who saw. Then something else happened. A second guard from further along marched over, and a third, and they lined up, and together, all of them, they saluted her. For her father, I suppose. For all the fathers who wore that uniform and didn't come home. For a little girl who was now 91 and had never stopped missing him. Margaret couldn't speak. She just kept nodding and holding that soldier's hand and crying, and her grandson knelt down beside the wheelchair and put his arm around her. And the two of them just sat there in the middle of the courtyard, while the guards stood at attention around them. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was too big for clapping. Eventually, the grandson stood up. He shook each soldier's hand. He couldn't get any words out either. And then he turned the wheelchair slowly and began pushing his grandmother back toward the waiting cab. As they passed my cart, Margaret looked at me. I don't know why. Maybe because I was the last face before the gate. And she smiled at me and she said, so softly I almost missed it, "He would have been proud, wouldn't he?" I said, "Yes, love, he would." She patted the air like she was patting my hand from a distance, and then she was gone. Into the cab, away down the road. Priya told me later that Margaret passed away 9 days after that, peacefully in her sleep. Her grandson wrote to the regiment afterward, one last letter in her name to thank them. I still stand at that same coffee cart. I still watch the guards every day, standing so still that tourists tap on them to see if they're real. But now, whenever I see one of those red tunics catch the light, I don't just see a soldier. I see a little girl who missed her father for 85 years. And I see the day a man in a bearskin hat broke every rule in the book, just to let her know he'd finally come home.